Malarkey here again. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Microsoft's data loss prevention features that are in the cloud. So when we talk about DLP, data loss prevention, the first thing everyone thinks of is just that, DLP. I've gone to the Compliance Center, I see that there's this data loss prevention part, and I can create data loss prevention policies. And yes, that is a huge part of it. Data loss prevention policies in the cloud, in the Compliance Center, allow you to put policies onto items like emails, SharePoint files, Teams files as well. They're in the same place. OneDrive files. And it goes beyond that. There's some endpoint stuff, CAS-B stuff, Power B stuff. You'll see that all in the DLP policies. And that's a great place to start. The DLP policies normally look for things like credit cards, personal information, social security numbers from US, Canada, wherever. Microsoft has a ton of templates, dozens of templates that you can start out with for DLP. And you can see how they work in a test mode, and then you can tune them by looking at how many hits you got for certain rules. So yes, DLP is a great place to start your DLP journey. But that's not the end of things. There's other things that we can use in Microsoft that are both built-in or add-ons, depending on your licenses, that make a lot of sense to look at. One of those other things is labeling, sensitivity labels, which used to be called Azure Information Protection or AIP labels. Under the covers, kind of still called that. And that used to be called something called Rights Management Service or RMS. All of these terms are still around, but what labeling lets you do is, first of all, it lets you label files, and that label stays with the file. It also allows you to potentially encrypt and modify the rights on files, which also will stay with files. So you can tell that this also sounds like something that would be good for data loss prevention, and it is. We could create a label that encrypts a file and only allows users from our organization to access that file, no matter where it goes. So we can make a file called internal confidential, and once, or a label called internal confidential, and once a file or an email, office file or an email or any other file is labeled such, then only people at our company who authenticate with our company's Azure AD accounts can access that file. We can also use these labels as DLP inputs, as conditions for those DLP policies that I mentioned. So we can say something like, well, if a file is labeled internal confidential, it's not even allowed to be sent outside or shared outside of our company. Whether it's encrypted or not, we can do that with labeling. So labeling is also a big part of DLP, and it's something you want to take a really good look at. It helps with classifying files. It fits very well with a company's file classification schemes or information classification schemes. And then there's some other locations. What I've mentioned so far in the DLP, it works great for Microsoft Cloud locations, Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, other things like that. What about when people sign up and start saving things in Box, Dropbox, all these other places? Well, Microsoft, a few years back, bought themselves a Cloud App Security product. Now, Microsoft's Cloud App Security can reach out and protect those files as well, possibly even labeling them or revoking permission to them, or even preventing people from storing things up on those cloud locations if they match a certain a DLP property. So Cloud App Security comes into the game. All of that combines in a pretty good way. We can do a lot to protect things. But that's not all. We also want to look at devices that people use. And Intune can help us with those devices. Intune now is being called Endpoint Management, but everyone that I know still calls it Intune. What about OneDrive and a mailbox? All those things, they get synced to either your laptop or your phone, be it iOS or Android. And if those are your personal phones, when you leave the company, you take them with you. Guess what? All that email, those OneDrive files are still there. Well, we can protect against that as well. We can leverage Intune to actually wipe Windows devices. We can use the same Intune to also wipe mobile devices like Android and iOS. We have a couple of choices with that. If we control the devices and they're fully enrolled, we can wipe the whole device. Even if they're not, though, if a user is using their personal device to get to our company data, we can use a smaller subset called Mobile Application Management to reach out to those phones and just yank all of our information back off of them, wipe only our company information off of them. So that's another good thing to think about, especially when people leave. You don't want them to take stuff with them. That's data loss, right? So we want to be careful and make sure that that doesn't happen either. So all of these things put together can really help us put a huge dent on data loss. Data loss prevention policies, there's the unified area for that, brings in all of those things that I was talking about: Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, OneDrive, there's Power BI, there's Endpoint DLP, which is a newer product, which we can have policies that say, well, if a file matches a certain criteria, you're not allowed to copy it to a USB drive, or sync apps like the Dropbox sync app aren't allowed to touch it. Certain browsers aren't allowed to touch it. So we can do that. Cloud App Security I mentioned before, a great tool. They're actually incorporating that now into DLP policies. You might see that depending on your license when you look at that. So those tools are great. The sensitivity labeling, users are the best at identifying information, so we really want to use that to our advantage. When we label files, we can encrypt them. We can also use the fact that they're labeled as criteria for the DLP policies in the other locations. And then devices, allowing Intune to help us control and potentially wipe our company information off of devices when they're lost, stolen, when a user leaves the company. So all of these things put together provide a nice holistic way to really control data and control data loss, especially in the Microsoft cloud and even in on-premise right now. Both devices and even file shares, we can get into those and do some data loss prevention. So in future videos, we'll try and talk about those individually. I know I always promise that, and sometimes I do and don't. Sorry about that. But what we will talk about probably in the next video is we'll try and make some sense on the licensing. Licensing in Microsoft is just witchcraft, and it's very difficult to get a handle on. There's so many different kinds of licenses. And in DLP, while a regular, E3, Office E3 might give you a little DLP, but if you want to go a little bit further, you have to have another license. If you want to do labeling, well, labeling is great. You can do some stuff with labeling right out of the box, but if you want to do some extra stuff like auto labeling, well, that's a different license. Cloud App Security, well, if you want to do some discovery and see where things went, well, that's a standard license like the Microsoft or Office E3. Well, if you want to start protecting things, well, now we need a different license for that. Endpoint DLP requires a different license. So there's all sorts of different licensing criteria depending on how far you want to go. We'll try and hit that and talk about what you need in the next session. So thanks for watching. If you have any comments, please put them in the comments. I'm always happy to read those, and often I will respond. So we'll see you next time.